Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us. As part of this series, I'm taking a look at the lesson cycle and blended formats. We're really focused on new learning. So what does it look like to do some of that direct instruction, some of that think aloud that we often provide for students as part of new learning that gives them access to some of the expert thinking that we do. I'm Randall Lober. I'll be the moderator for this particular webinar, and my colleague, Dr. Anissa Collins, will be our presenter here today. We work, as you probably know, for IRRE, where I serve teachers and leaders as a senior instructional speech specialist, and Dr. Collins serves as the director of instructional supports. She'll be leading the conversation today, but I'll be helping to facilitate some of the back channel conversation as well as doing some follow-up conversation with communication with you afterward. So please be on the lookout for that. Without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to her so we can go ahead and get started with the day in earnest.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I'm glad everybody's here. And like Randy said, we're going to go ahead and get started because we know your time is so valuable. So today, as you noticed, as you signed up, what we've been trying to do is really break apart the learning cycle or the lesson cycle and really thinking about what are some of those high yield, high leverage strategies that we can use that really get a lot of mileage both for us and for the kids. And so today we're going to be talking about the new learning piece because that can be some of the most difficult, no matter what our learning environment, whether we're in person, brick and mortar, or whether we're doing virtual and starting the school year remote. So our ICANs are to define the new learning as part of the overall lesson learning cycle, to identify criteria for deciding whether new learning really should occur at home or at school for those of us who may be in a blended session, and then identifying strategies for facilitating new learning at home. And while we're also going to talk about is the idea of the distinction between if we're doing all remote, which I know some of you guys are starting out the year that way, is what makes most sense to do in those synchronous sessions that are really valuable and we don't have a lot of those versus what can we have the kids do asynchronously when they're on their own. So our ground rules are to begin and end on time. This is a 1-hour session, so we'll end at 4:30. We ask that you please stay focused. You don't have to have your camera on, but we do ask that you keep with us and to please use chat as well as the Pear Deck app in order to be a more engaged participant for your sake as well as ours. Be respectful of each other. If you do want to share something out loud, just let us know, and we'd be more than happy to have you unmute and share some of that thinking with the group. Assume positive intent. You guys are all here as volunteers. We appreciate that. We're glad that we're able to offer this for you all. And everybody's here as a learner because nobody has done this type of school and teaching the way we're about to do it. Use the chat feature as much as you want and as much as you can. As Randy said, he's going to be doing the back channeling today. So if you have a question, please make sure to put it in the chat and we'll try to answer that as we go through, as well as extend any conversation. So if an idea pops up in your head from something that I said and you want to share that, please feel free. The last ground rule then is to mute your microphone. We ask that just simply so that any ambient noise is down to a minimum and we try to have the least amount of echoing. So just for a little bit of housekeeping, like I said with the chat, please, please, please use that as much as you want. The questions will be tracked and responded to. So if we don't get a chance to answer it before 4:30, we will do so in a follow-up email with you. So we'll definitely make sure that we do that. And the chat will be saved just as an FYI so that we can go through it and make sure that any of those really good nuggets of wisdom that you've shared, that we can put that in that follow-up email, as Randy had said, so that we can all benefit from it. You know, my favorite word, cross-pollination. So we've got folks from all over, from Delaware to Oregon and Michigan to Texas, I think is kind of the geography of the day. All right, so here's our warm-up, and we're going to use Pear Deck for this. So if you have joined in, fantastic. If you haven't, we can still join in by going to joinpd.com and then doing the code that's in the top right-hand corner of our screen here. Our warm-up, though, is on average, students are more likely to retain new content/skills when taught directly by their teacher. What are our thinking around that? Do we completely disagree, somewhat agree, or completely agree? You'll notice at the bottom of the screen for Pear Deck, in the tab or the device you're using, there's a purple dot. Go ahead and click on that and move that dot to whichever aspect of the continuum you are feeling most strongly about. All right, and I think we've got most of the people. So I'm going to go ahead and lock the screen, because if not, you can see those purple dots moving, and trust me, as a teacher, you don't necessarily want that if you use it in the classroom. So here we go. Here's what we felt like. Somewhat disagree seemed to be the majority of the folks, but we had quite a few with a somewhat agree, and then some a somewhat completely agree. So somewhere in the middle there, that probably, I'm going to take a guess, but feel free to add in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm going to take a guess that for the bulk of us, it's really dependent on what it is, what that new content or skill is. So would anybody like to share, why did you put somewhat disagree or completely agree? All right, well, I'm not going to call on anybody, so. Randy, is there anything in the chat?
We do have some responses coming in. So we feel that the learning really happens in the application, not necessarily as a result of the direct instruction. And that learning styles play a role as well. And as well, again, another response coming to the effect that students learn best by doing, not necessarily directly from us, which we won't argue with. That's certainly, the subject of many old adages throughout education, and what research will tell us as well. But we'll turn it over to Anissa to talk more about where we fit here in the new learning cycle.
All right, thank you guys. So first of all, let's just clarify our terms to make sure that we have that common language amongst ourselves. When we think of the basic learning cycle or lesson cycle, there's several of them. There's 5 E's, there's a gradual release of responsibility. All of those are really at the heart the same thing. Whoops. Which is, if I don't hit the wrong button, that we start with a hook. In some way, we're asking kids to engage in the learning. Typically, this might be a novel thing that we're asking them to do. It could be a picture inductive model. It could be some kind of vocabulary play that we're asking them to do, but something to grab them. In the science standards, we talk about phenomenon. So it's really just trying to get them into that learning. Then we have the new learning, or oftentimes it's considered I do. So where completely agree with you guys, Felicia, about by doing, and Labana, I think you also said about like being performing or teaching somebody else. Absolutely. And that being said, we're going to look at why that I do part, or the new learning, sometimes does really need to have us as the guide for a small part of that. Guided practice then is when we have the we do, where we're asking our kids to all do that together in some way, shape, or form, so we can really look at where they are, what they know, what they don't know, get any of those misconceptions out of the way, and really make sure that we have that opportunity to give them the feedback that they need and do those formative assessments for sure. Then the independent practice, the you do, that could be the you do together in small groups, or it could be the you do alone. With the remote learning, for those of us who are starting out the school year that way, it's going to be a lot more of the you do alone. So one of our other sessions coming up, we'll talk a little bit about how can we make that as engaging and interactive as possible when we don't have the kids in front of us. And then lastly, closure. No matter what, whether in the brick and mortar building or whether we're doing a school remotely, it's how do we close out that lesson so that we make sure that that learning, the good learning that has happened, stays there and sticks with the kids. Okay, so if we're thinking about new learning, we're really looking at the idea of that it's short, it's goal focused, and we think of it as like bursts of new learning so that it isn't a full hour of lecture for our secondary folks, but that instead we're really, really focused and concentrated on a particular skill or particular piece of content that we really want kids to get better at. It's often achieved through Think Alouds or modeling, and that's what we're really going to talk about. And that's where we really come in. It's like, how do the kids know how to do that? Sometimes they can read about it. Sometimes we need to share some of our knowledge and our understanding of it with them. And it's definitely direct instruction in skill and content. So that, again, they can do that practice. They can do that, teach somebody else, because now they have the foundations. So once again, using Pear Deck, this time we're going to ask you guys to write a response, to type a response in. What are some effective strategies you've used during the new learning / I do phase while emergency learning was taking place this spring? What made them effective? We know this fall is going to feel a lot different than in the springtime, no matter what our learning environment is, but we'd like to hear what are some of those effective strategies that you use during the new learning or I do phase while emergency learning was happening. Okay, and to be fully transparent as a facilitator, I am looking at my iPad because I've got the Pear Deck up so I can see the responses. Okay, there's a lot of really great answers here. I'm going to give just a couple more seconds and then start showing some of those really good responses. Okay, and here's some of the ideas that you all shared with us. Videos of you reading and doing math problems so that students could see how to do those. That's fantastic. We've seen quite a few of those homemade videos, self-made videos, and they are phenomenal, so keep that up. Projects, definitely. Oftentimes, what we find in the brick and mortar traditional school is we want to do those projects, but sometimes we feel like we don't have that flexibility. A lot of people saw the spring as that opportunity to do a little bit more of that project-based learning that we've been wanting to. Sample answers or photos when giving an assignment, so great, that great modeling of what it should look like. Using the iPhone as a doc cam and a small whiteboard to show, fantastic. Interactive learning tools. Feel free to add in the chat any of those interactive tools that you used or that you saw your other teacher, your colleagues or other teachers use so that we can share with each other. And then again, videotape lessons and a list of materials easily found at home so that they can have that hands-on piece. We were talking with some teachers last week about how can they possibly get a list and maybe a gallon baggie together. This was a science teacher of some basic materials that they felt the kids either could get or that they could offer up as a part of the materials from the school so the kids could still do some of those hands-on labs. Okay, great, excellent. And just in case anybody's wondering, at the end, you guys will be able to get access to this PowerPoint presentation through Pear Deck, and you'll actually see not only the slides, but your responses as well. All right, so decisions. We have multiple paths. We're just showing two of them, but we have multiple paths that we can choose. And whereas professional judgment has always been so important and critical as professional educators, it is even more so now, because we have so many more decisions we have to make. If we are doing a blended piece, it's what do I do when I have the kids with me for that, 1 day a week or so, versus what do I have them do at home. If we're all remote, it's what do I do with them synchronously because I'm only going to have them 30 minutes, versus what do I have them do by themselves. So there's a lot of decisions that we have to make, even more so than normal. And one of the things that Randy and I and the team really thought about is, so how do we decide? How do we go about and try to think what makes the most sense to do, either in person or during that synchronous learning, or have the kids do at home asynchronously? And as we think about new learning, oftentimes it's obviously a good match, or else we wouldn't do it at all, but it's a good match to do in person or during synchronous sessions. Especially if it's necessary for those foundational processes or skills, or if we're feeling like we're going to get a lot of questions from the kids around what we're going to model or talk about. So it could be modeling note-taking strategies or doing a think aloud through problem solving. Like I said, if we feel like there's going to be a lot of questions or a lot of misunderstanding or misinterpretations. When we're thinking about the fact, though, that our face-to-face time, whether that's in person or on a screen, that is very valuable time now. It's precious. It's gold, even more than it ever has been. And so we would say that the better match for new learning, whenever we can do it, is that at-home asynchronous piece. So that we've got that limited time. So whatever content we can shift to have the kids do at home by themselves is helpful. So we could do that think aloud, making that video, as you guys had mentioned, of going through a math process or strategy. We could have the kids do a reading and have text-dependent questions. It could be viewing and responding to a lecture, a mini lecture, either one that we give and we videotape, or one that we find. There's no reason why we have to reinvent every wheel. If there's an ed puzzle out there that's a good one and we want to add some questions to it, great. Whatever makes the most sense for us and for the kids. And then thinking about those projects that somebody had mentioned, that independent research. How do we really get kids to take more ownership of their learning and get into it and dig into it themselves? Okay, so once again, we're going to ask you guys to write a response in Pear Deck, but think back to the effective strategies you discussed earlier, the ones that we talked about, those projects, the videos, those types of things. Which of them might be most suitable to remote learning or to that asynchronous aspect? Yeah, and I'll give you guys a few moments to put in your responses. Okay, give you guys just another moment. All right, and let me show some of those responses, some of those great ideas you guys had. All right. So definitely those projects and videos can be very effective, especially asynchronously, absolutely. And yeah, that is something that doesn't matter what age level. Obviously the complexity of that project or the length of the video especially can vary depending on the age of the student. But absolutely, those are great ideas to do asynchronously and to do at home. Responding to questions to videos, yes. Definitely thinking about, and we're going to talk about this in just a few moments, thinking about what do we have the kids do during that video or during that reading. And I love all of them, Julie, all of them will work well depending on your teaching style and ability. There's not one size fits all. So it's really a matter of what you are comfortable with. I worked with a math teacher this spring who was not comfortable at all doing a modeling and videotaping herself, but she was great at finding some very easily accessible videos for the kids. And so I'm like, fine, then let's think about what are some questions we can ask the kids to do with that, so that it's very interactive and there's that student accountability piece. And then for kindergarten, and I would say for a whole bunch of our kids, but definitely for our little ones, what can we do with hands-on? How do we continue to do the manipulatives, the math manipulatives, and those small labs? What can we do in terms of the kitchen science type of thing so we can keep that aspect of the learning going strong? And then the interactive tools like Screencastify, whether that's us doing that to help explain or having the kids use Screencastify or Flipgrid or something like that for them to do that oral explanation for us and for their classmates. Okay, great. All right, so there are 3 practical strategies that we want to highlight, but we're really just going to focus and model one of those today because of our time limit. So really 3 of the high leverage ones that we have for new learning at home are really the Think Aloud, which is very dependent on us, the Question Chunk Annotate, which is dependent on us at the top of that, but then the kids are on much more on a self-paced base after that. And then structured note-taking. Structured note-taking, I think we're all very familiar with. It can come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. I know a lot of schools have really gotten together and said, you know what, let's all use the same structured note-taking now. If they haven't done it before, it's like, let's do that. Let's all use Cornell Notes, or let's all use window panes, or whatever that might be. Question Chunk Annotate is a really good reading support strategy for kids, where we ask kids an overarching high-level question that we want them to answer at the end. Then we give them a text that is accessible to them, and we chunk it into smaller bite-sized pieces. That way, then, it really helps the kids who oftentimes struggle with stopping to annotate or stopping to process. And then the last piece, the annotate, is really helping kids learn how to annotate text. I know we have all had a student in our class or in our building that when you ask them to highlight the most important things, the whole page is pink or yellow, depending on the color. And so it's really helping kids learn those skills. But like I said, today we're really going to focus on the Think Aloud, and I'm glad we are, because a lot of you guys brought up that idea of modeling, of creating those videos, and this is exactly in that wheelhouse. So if you guys have been doing that, that is phenomenal, and we're hoping that we can give you a couple of tweaks that you might do, or just some things to think about as you guys are creating more of those Think Alouds. Now, the one thing that we do want to clarify is when we talk about a Think Aloud, we're going to talk about a very specific type of modeling. Modeling is really any time where we show how to do something in terms of like the step-by-step. So if we watch a cooking show, that is absolutely modeling. If we're watching a cooking show where they're not only showing us the steps, but they're also telling us why they're making the decisions they're making, that's a Think Aloud. And so the Think Aloud can be really, really helpful when we want the kids to see visibly what's going on internally in our heads. Yeah, that can be scary, but in this case, we're really talking about what are the questions that we ask ourselves internally, and what are the thought processes that we go through. There was a study on literacy done years ago around Think Alouds and the power of showing kids how good readers read. And the phrase that came out of that study really was that good readers know what to do. And if kids struggle, it's because they just don't know. They don't have that internal dialogue. So whether that's a reading, whether it's doing mathematics, whether it's performing any type of skill, if they don't know the internal dialogue, then they're really struggling. And that's what a Think Aloud helps to do. So there's 5 basic pieces as we're thinking about planning a Think Aloud that we're going to go through. The first is to determine the target skill or the text that we're going to use. It doesn't have to be a text. I am going to model with kind of a text today, but we've seen a lot of really awesome Think Alouds in terms of from art teachers of really showing not only, again, not just the process, but the thinking behind those decisions and why different choices were made, and definitely in mathematics for sure. Identify any relevant sub-skills. So what is it that the kids have to do in order to get to that target in the first place? What is underneath that? Hence the submarine. Identify touchstone talking points. Really critical. And you're going to see how well mine work out today. Because if we don't have basically a script for ourselves, especially if we're doing it live, then that can be a struggle. So we really want to make sure that we've thought about what are our talking points. Determine how students will engage, just like we had mentioned earlier in terms of watching a video or anything like that. What is the accountability piece when they're doing, watching that or listening to that Think Aloud? And then determine how students will be held accountable for the learning. What's the after effect? And that gets back to some of those great points in the chat. It can't just be a watch me, but it's a how am I then going to practice? What am I going to do? How am I going to use that skill? All right, so for the target skill, we might choose one that's commonly repeated. So something that comes up multiple times throughout either the unit or throughout the year. It could be one where we are seeing students struggle and we're going to go back a little bit and make sure that they really have that target skill because it's so critical as a foundational block for other things. And that could be the internal thought process that we're just not seeing the kids knowing how to do something, or it could be the decision tree. We're not seeing kids being able to make the right decisions, or the quickest decisions instead of taking the really long path through the woods to get something done. Then thinking about the target text or media, like I said, it doesn't have to be a text, but what are we going to use? What are we going to look at? There has to be a visual. I know podcasts are great, but for kids, when we're doing a Think Aloud, there has to be that visual aspect of it as well. So for the model Think Aloud that I'm going to talk about today, let me set it up for you real quick. I taught a literacy supplemental class, and Laura, you're on the call, so you know the literacy curriculum I'm talking about. But one of the lessons in there is asking the kids to read an article about social networking and whether that really helps people make connections and build relationships. So I asked the kids to do that, to read that article, and I had an overarching question for them. So my target skill as I was planning this out was, okay, I want them to write a draft written response to that overarching question. And I really want to make sure the kids are taking advantage of the rubric and doing rubric checks, that meta-analysis piece. Because too often the kids turn it in and then wonder why they didn't get as good of a score as they wanted to. And it's because let's look at the rubric. The text that I'm going to use then for my Think Aloud is the overarching question. I really want to use the question itself so that we can really try to dig into it, as well as the rubric. So the second piece then that I had to do was thinking about, so what are those sub-skills, the building blocks, what's that foundational knowledge that they may need in order to complete that? Or it could be the skills taught in conjunction. What else do they need to do in order to write this draft, for instance? And for my kids, what I was thinking to model this is the sub-skills. In order to write that draft, first, I wanted to definitely make sure that they could analyze the prompt well. that they knew how to write a claim, and give them some pointers on that. Textual evidence, can they use textual evidence in order to help support? And then those supporting details, having more than just one reason why they think that they're right in their opinion. So I really just started thinking about what else do they need to have and be able to do in order to write that draft and do the rubric check. So I'm going to take a stopping point here for us to process. Using Pear Deck again, for those of you guys who are logged in, how can focusing a Think Aloud on specific skills and sub-skills really help support your students? If you haven't had a chance to log into Pear Deck, feel free to also add any thoughts or comments into the chat bar. Okay, give y'all a few more minutes. And you are making this extremely difficult. What Pear Deck, the teacher dashboard, lets me do is select which ones I might want to show or at least put on the top. And I'm really struggling because they're all so good. Okay, go ahead and finish up your response, but I'm going to start sharing some of those ideas and thoughts that y'all had. At least if I hit the right button. There we go. All right, so some of the things that you all said, students may not have been thinking of the skill, so the Think Aloud will help them form those ideas, give inspiration. Absolutely. How many times have we had a kid not turn in an assignment because they didn't think they could do it right? And I'm like, well, you got it. You know, I don't know even where to start to give you feedback unless I see something. So definitely give them inspiration and expand on their own thinking. Seeing the thought process, absolutely, because that may be something that they are just not as proficient at yet. When we're better prepared, the students will be better prepared. I love that. Absolutely, and that's one of the things that in the next little piece here, we're going to talk about those talking points and why it's so critical for us. Give teachers a chance to hone in on the gap in knowledge to see how students are thinking. Yes, one of the things that we can do as a Think Aloud is we can do a Think Aloud around one small piece to get kids started. And that's actually something we can ask kids to do, is their own Think Aloud as part of that assessment and checking for their own understanding. Making sure students are all on the same page with a specific skill or sub-skill, and benefiting from listening to how learning takes place. Great way to say that, because that's really it. Modeling, doing that Think Aloud is key so that the kids truly are internalizing the correct way to do that internal thinking themselves or ask those internal questions. Okay, fantastic. And again, if there's any other comments or you want to expand on your thinking, just let us know. And you can either unmute yourself or put that in the chat. So the next piece that we need to really think about and concentrate on as we're doing that Think Aloud and preparing for it is identifying those touchstone talking points. What is it exactly that we want to say to the kids, that we want to show, to model? And it also, especially if we're videotaping it for that asynchronous use at home, it can mitigate that last class of the day, gets the best lesson, gets the best of us, so that we really are thinking from the very get-go of what are those most critical pieces. And as soon as we can outline the sub-skills like we did earlier, then that will help us determine our talking points. For instance, for my modeling Think Aloud here today, some of the talking points that I wrote down are breaking down the prompt. I want to really emphasize that to the kids and say, you know, one of the questions that I ask is, what is it asking me to do? Breaking down the rubric. Kids oftentimes see a rubric, no matter how small or how complex it is, and they're like, no, I'm not even going to touch it. So really helping them hone in and focus on that proficiency and advanced section as their goal. Looking at the rubric one section at a time, again, trying to model and show you don't have to do everything at once. You can look at it in small chunks. Doing that first sentence helpers. How do we start? What's that inspiration? How do we get going? Free write draft response. It's okay if it's not perfect, and really, you know, modeling that is something I have to tell myself as well as a writer. Rereading the rubric, checking and comparing to the draft writing, and asking myself, what did I hit? What did I miss? Okay, and I forgot my quotes. Okay. So one example in the younger grade levels is, and somebody had mentioned this earlier about reading to the kids and doing read alouds. So this is just an example of a teacher actually recreated Dr. Seuss book, I Had Trouble in Getting to Salisalu, on Google Slides, and then used Screencastify, I believe, in order to do a modeling Think Aloud. And some of her talking points that she wrote down are things where she was like, she wanted to really point out that she wonders as she reads, and how she really focused on words in context. How did she how did she really break words apart that she didn't know? And then also in this book particularly, there was a punctuation, a lot of interesting punctuation that she wanted to really show the wonderings that she had around that. The last thing then, well, the second to last thing, but the last thing that really is important before we do the Think Aloud, whether we're doing it live during a synchronous session or in person, or whether we're videotaping it, is, so how do we get the kids to engage? What are they going to do while we're doing the Think Aloud? Are they going to replicate the steps? Is it, you know, I do, then you do, I do, then you do? Are they supposed to take notes? Do they complete a graphic organizer? Do they follow along and then do something? What is it that we're asking the kids to do? And for mine, I was thinking, well, I want them to follow along, and I want them to make notes on their own prompt as we're looking at it. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to have the kids do a thumbs up, thumbs down for the rubric check. I'm going to have them look at my writing and then tell me, does it hit or does it miss? When I was thinking about doing this on the asynchronous aspect, I did do this, and I created a video, and I created a graphic organizer then where that would be on a Google Doc, and the kids would copy and paste either a thumbs up or thumbs down icon, and then put their rationale of why they thought it was a thumbs up or thumbs down. And here's what that might look like. So for each part of the rubric criteria, they would pull either the thumbs up, thumbs down, and then write their rationale. Okay. Oops. All right, so I want to take just a quick break here. Randy, are there any questions or anything that's come up in chat that we need to address before I move forward?
There we go. Well, actually, Julie and I are in the middle of hammering out a question. And the question is, so what should the script focus on? And I was trying to get a deeper sense of what she's asking. So should the script focus on clarifying the skill? And I would largely say yes, that's part of the overarching goal. But later, she asked, how do we come up with those questions as we are thinking about the Think Aloud and how we're creating those sorts of things. So I was going to share some thinking in chat, but I don't want to steal any thunder from the presenter here, so I'll let her go first before I add to that.
Well, I have full faith in Randy to answer this question. I will say that the one thing that I tend to do is I pretend it's like, if I could open up a kid's head and literally see the brain working, what would I want to see? What kind of questions do I want the kid to ask while they're doing whatever it is, while they're doing that reading, while they're doing the writing, while they're doing the math problem? So it's that type of visualization that I go through to really say, okay, what is it that I want the kids to ask themselves internally? What is it that I want them to do? And then I also think about myself as a learner. It's like, okay, well, what do I do? I remember when I first started teaching science, I had to also teach math because the kids oftentimes were really struggling with some of that, with some of the algebra aspect. And I had to really stop and think, it's like, how do I do that? How do I know? Because for a lot of us, it's just automatic. So it's really trying to visualize and slow down. What do I do? What questions do I ask myself? Or conversely, what questions do I want the kids to ask internally while they're doing it?
Mm-hmm. And so that answer doesn't differ much from mine. In that, so as someone in the social studies realm, I also find myself teaching a lot of reading and a lot of writing to help kids access either the primary, secondary, or tertiary sources that we were reading. So as I was making, decisions about, what my steps would be during Think Alouds, and I'm still making those decisions, the idea is to kind of think about why I make all those pen strokes. So if I am underlining or working through an activity, why am I doing that? What is that? What purpose does that annotation serve for me? Or what purpose does writing this question or note serve for me? And keeping almost a journal as I'm writing. So a little bit of that metacognition. Why am I doing these sorts of things to help bring all that thinking out of my head and make it visible for the kids? So Julie, I hope that helps to provide some clarity. And if not, please let us know and we'll continue hammering it out in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you to both of you guys. So let's take a real quick look at what this might look like if I were to do the synchronous and you guys were my class, okay? So I have it set up as a pair deck, but I'm not gonna ask you to do anything quite yet. Okay, so I would have started with talking about, remember we read that article around social networking, and here's where I would start. So I'm going to ask you guys to write a rough draft response to the overarching question from the article that we read. But the first thing I want to do is I want to show you and think with you on how do I even know where to start? What is the question really asking me? Because that's really the first place I start. I read it and I say, okay, what is it really that they're asking me to do? So in this case, if you read along with me, is technology such as text messaging, IMs or instant messaging, and social network sites like Facebook or online communities, is that kind of technology a win-win situation where it helps with connections and building close relationships? Is it a win-lose where it's helping with connections but not building close relationships? Or is it a lose-lose situation where we really are not connected or building close relationships? Okay, so the win-win, win-lose, lose-lose. That is really telling me I need to select one of those. And so as I'm thinking about win-win, what does that mean? It means two things, and they're both in the positive. So as I keep looking at the things in parentheses, I see that it keeps talking about connections and building relationships. Those are my two things. So I have to decide, do I feel that's positive in connections and building relationships? Do I feel it does connections but not? That would be the win-lose. Or do I feel it doesn't do either? And here's the great news. There's not a right answer as long as you have evidence and thinking to back up your answer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put a little star here for win-win, because that's the one I feel most strongly about. I feel that if I'm thinking about all of these things, text messaging where I'm texting my friends all the time, or Facebook, that's connecting, that's building relationships, that's connecting me to people and having relationships that I may not normally see. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you guys to do then before moving on is, for those of you in Pear Deck, I'm going to ask you to move your icon, drag your icon to which one do you think you would do? Would you select and write about a win-win, a win-lose, or a lose-lose situation? Now, granted, guys, you all didn't read the article, but play along. Okay, I think we've got most people responding, so I'm just going to lock the screen so we can show. All right, so it looks like we've got part of the class is going to write about a win-win situation, and part of the class is going to write about a win-lose, where it helps with connections but not building relationships. Now, if you guys decide as we go through that you want to switch and do it to the lose-lose, that's fine as well, because this is a draft. So we're really just going to focus on getting some of our thoughts on paper. All right, so like I said, one of the things that we're also focused on in this lesson is looking at our rubric and making sure that our writing is really closely connected with the rubric so that we get as good of a grade as possible, and obviously that we get better at our writing. That's the whole point. So we're going to look at just the one piece of the rubric, which is explaining what? Explaining the answer. And that really comes down to providing a correct, or in this case, an on-topic and plausible answer. So as I look at my rubric, one of the things that I think about is like, okay, are there other things that I can add to that so that I remember what that really means? I provided a correct, on-topic, and plausible answer. Well, one of the things that I really want you guys to think about, and one of the things that I do as a writer, is oftentimes I use words that are in the question to start my response. That's perfectly acceptable in here. That's definitely what we want to do because it gives our readers exactly what we're going to talk about. So I'm writing on my rubric words from questions to remember that. And then the second thing that I really want to focus on and remind myself, because I'm always trying to write myself notes, is it's got to be specific and it's got to be clear. Because plausible is a great word, and if I look it up, it means that it's basically something that could be true. But I really want to focus and think also, it's like I got to remind myself it has to be specific and it has to be clear to the reader. If the reader doesn't understand me, I didn't do my job. All right, so here we go. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read mine, my response, the first part, and I'm going to ask you guys to look at the rubric. And in just a moment, when I ask you to, I'm going to ask you to drag the icons, either a thumbs up or thumbs down. Do you think I hit it or do you think I missed it? So here's my answer, y'all. Technology such as text messaging and social network sites is a win-win situation and building, is a win-win situation for staying connected and building close relationships. That's my first sentence. So if I think about, that's my answer. That's what I think to that question is, does technology, is it a win-win situation? Here's what I said. So did I provide a correct, on-topic, and plausible answer? Did I use words from the question? Was I specific and clear? Go ahead and put thumbs up, thumbs down. Take just a few minutes. I'll show you guys the screen just so you can see that if you don't lock it first and people still move their icons, it can get a little wonky. You can see all these little hands icons moving. So let's look at, so I'm going to lock it so you guys can see. It's like, okay, that helps when you're doing this in class. All right, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 thumbs up and 4 thumbs down. Okay, great. Thank you guys. So what I would do if I was synchronous for sure is I would then call on a couple of my kiddos to unmute themselves and to share, or I might ask them to put something in chat or put another Pear Deck prompt where they'd have to write their responses. Thinking about that asynchronous piece, which probably makes more sense for this, I had that graphic organizer. So the kids were still expected to do thumbs up, thumbs down, and share their rationale for that. Oops. All right, excellent. And then the last piece, then for student accountability, how will you know whether students understood the skill? What are they going to do afterwards? Are there going to be student-to-student interactions, whether that's brick and mortar in person, social distancing peer conversations, or whether that's using Flipgrid or doing the discussion board on Google Classroom or Schoology? Are they going to be asked to write something? Are they going to create their own video using Flipgrid or Screencastify? Well, I don't know if you can do Screencastify, but using an app or their phone to do that. Is there some kind of independent practice of the skill? So for instance, word problems, or there's a authentic assessment where the kids have to use their math skills then to answer the response. Or am I going to do a check-in? You know, if we're in the brick and mortar school, we can still do conferencing with kids, albeit we have to, you know, make sure that we've got all of the health aspect, the safety aspects in place. If we're doing it remote, then it's, do we have a specific time where we're doing a Google Meet with a student? Do we have office hours? What does that look like? There's various ways that people do it, but it's just a matter of, is that how I'm going to hold the student accountable so that they can orally tell me or show me what they now can do. In this case, going back and finishing up my model Think Aloud for today, my student accountability is that the next thing I would do with you guys is I would have you all write your individual responses. And then do some kind of peer feedback with the rubric check. And of course, for my kiddos, typically I would do some feedback stems so that they weren't just doing ad hoc feedback. And then a self-assessment. So really focusing in on that metacognitive piece. How well do they feel they did on the rubric check and their rationale? What did they hit? What did they miss? Now, I will be totally honest, when I was creating the videos using Screencastify and Google Slides, when I first started, I realized, oh my gosh, this is going to be 10 minutes long if I do the whole rubric and if I do iterations. So that was another aha that I was able to do with my talking points and thinking about is like, I'm breaking this up into 3 chunks. I'm going to break it up into 3 little videos so that the kids had to watch video part 1 and then do something and get feedback, then video part 2, do something, get feedback, and then video part 3. So again, thinking about that chunking short bursts and really focusing in on a particular skill or sub-skill as I went through, so it didn't get so long. That, and can you imagine kids watching a 10-minute video without doing anything? Okay. And yeah, the reason why for the peer feedback, those feedback stems are really, really critical, especially with the rubric check, is that idea that kids can be honest, brutally honest. And the rubric check helps because you can ask them to use very specific words directly from the rubric itself. And then feedback stems are things like we could have them, I like, I wonder. You know, tell something that they thought worked well in the writing, ask them a clarifying question, and give them maybe a suggestion. That's dependent on the assignment as well as on you and your kids and what you feel comfortable with or what you've used in the past. All right, so what are some interactions and accountability strategies that you feel might work for you and your kids? So I've talked about several. We've looked at some. I modeled a couple different ways that it might be done, but I want to hear from you guys. What are some of the interaction and accountability strategies that you feel might work best for you and your kids? Go ahead and jot down your response using Pear Deck, and then we'll share a few of those responses in just a sec as we start to wrap up. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and show some of those because I'm also trying to be mindful of time, y'all. So you can take the girl out of Texas, but you can't take the y'all out of my voice. All right, so younger students recording themselves doing the work. Absolutely, that's a really great way to do it, because then they can show you exactly where they either are hitting all of the marks or whether they may be struggling. This spring, working with a PE teacher, he would do some modeling of exercises for the kids every week or so, and then the kids had to do a video in response where they showed themselves doing one of the exercises so that he could help them with their form as needed. Using Pear Deck, definitely an option, as well as video responses or Screencastify, Google Docs, Google Meets, answering questions through Google Forms, forums and discussion boards, and just wanted to put this one up. I like rubrics for kids. It holds them accountable and allows for independence. Absolutely. Okay, great. All right, so real quick then, some implementation tips before we head out and go our separate ways. When we're thinking about that synchronous session, and this is true in the classroom as well, although there's not exactly an actual mute button on kids, but definitely making sure that they mind the mute button. Because when you're doing a Think Aloud, you want them to have all eyes and ears on you. Build in stopping points for clarification. I tried to do that today using Pear Deck, but absolutely making sure that if we feel, especially if we're doing synchronous, that it might be something that's more difficult for kids to wrap their brains around, making sure that there's those points for clarification. If we're doing it asynchronously, like I talked about making the video with Screencastify and then having the graphic organizer for kids to do thumbs up, thumbs down, making sure that we're capturing our thinking, whether that's in PowerPoint, Screencastify, Screencast-O-Matic, Pear Deck, a camera. Somebody had mentioned their camera. It doesn't matter. Whatever you use, whatever makes the most sense. I know some schools are buying those less expensive dock cams for teachers to have at home. But I've also heard of quite a few teachers being very creative with their iPhone hanging from above so that they can show them working a problem or doing an art exhibit for the kids. The other thing you could do is you could always record the synchronous conversation. So if you're having synchronous session and doing it, then record it so that kids who may not have been able to be there can then hear you do it and you wouldn't have to do it twice. Some just common considerations, stick to the script. And I think there's something in the chat as well about a script. But the more we can do our own personal thinking first and stick to that, the more we can actually convey and show the kids what's going on internally. Communicate expectations. What is it that you want the kids to do, both during and after? And then choose the right formative assessment for the job. Thumbs up, thumbs down is sometimes just a temperature check, right? How do I feel? In this case, it was a true formative. Did it meet the criteria? Did it not meet the criteria? And then, of course, the rationale for that. But whatever you use, just making sure that it makes sense and matches what you really want from the kids. All right, so our closure. We're just going to leave you with this question to think about. But consider your first 6 weeks of instruction. For which skills would your students most benefit from your creating a Think Aloud? And what might that look like? You can feel free to unmute, feel free to put it in either Pear Deck or Zoom, but I really want to make sure I honor everybody's time. So what might that look like? Which skills would really benefit from a Think Aloud? And then as you guys are thinking about that, real quick, we do want to thank you all for being with us. And we appreciate your trust in us in helping you as we navigate through this. You will get a follow-up email. One will actually, well, I'll let Randy talk about the survey, but I'm going to ask you to fill out a feedback survey like always, just so we can continue to get better as well. And then we will send a follow-up email with any resources that we can also share to help you guys out. Randy? What am I forgetting?
You hit it all. You said you were going to let me talk about the survey, then you told me about the survey.
Yeah, I know.
The survey will pop up as soon as you leave from here today. So it'll pop up in another window, as the screen says there. That survey is our best indicator and best evidence that you attended and participated. So if you would like to receive a printed certificate at the end of this 8-week series that says your name here attended for this many hours, please make sure you are completing that survey. The survey will ask you to respond to an exit ticket, and the exit ticket is located there. What most concerns you about supporting students with new learning this fall? What are some solutions you and your colleagues have discussed? So please feel free to add that thinking into the exit ticket, and we look forward to hearing your responses. And as always, we want to continue improving as well. So again, please grace us with all of your thinking and feedback as we navigate this new world as well.
All right, excellent. And I know this was a whirlwind, trying to get through all the steps of Think Aloud. So if you guys have any questions whatsoever, or you want to talk through any part of it, please, please, please just let us know. Randy and I will stick around right now for a few minutes if you want to unmute yourself and ask any questions, or feel free to email either one of us, and we can set up a time off of this webinar as well to talk. So thank you guys. We appreciate y'all.